This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is Caroline Marion Dawson. She was born on March 3, 1921. She served in the American Red Cross from 1943 to 1944. She achieved no rankings. We are recording this on November 16, 2015. I'm Lindsay Odom, and I'm conducting this interview, no relation. Miss Dawson, thank you so much for having me. I'd love to hear a little bit about your childhood. You said you were from Chester, South Carolina, so what was life like growing up there?
Chester is an old town and a very small town, and of course I'm a child of the Depression, and we lived through that. My father was a young lawyer in Chester and died when he was 36 years old, and my mother was, of course, widowed, and she had 2 children. Myself, I was 4, and my brother was 2, and her mission in life for her was to live long enough to rear her 2 children. And she did that and lived to be 93 years old.
Wow.
Even though she had had a kidney removed, which was rare at that time, before I was born. And she had to be careful about her health, but she was a wonderful mother and a great reader, and she read often to us, which is really a wonderful thing for a child to have. We lived in a neighborhood in a little street called Walnut Street off of Saluda Street, which was the main thoroughfare to Rock Hill and on to Columbia. And we had about 20 children in the neighborhood, and we played all the games you can play without much of anything. We played ball, and sometimes the baseball bat wasn't a bat, but just a big board, you know. And then we had, the children all had wagons or tricycles or some kind of toys, and there was a big gang of us. We went to a house next door where Mrs. Roseborough lived, who was alone and had a large yard, and played in her yard, and we played all kinds of games, including touch football and that sort of thing. So I think we had a good life, and when the Depression hit, we didn't know anyone was poor, because none of us had a whole lot, and nobody else had a whole lot. And so we just had a good time with what we had. Other than that, I don't know. We went to the little schools, elementary schools around town that were small and had a class of about 30 students in each class. And then there was no middle school, as people call today junior high school or something like that. I don't know what it's called today.
Junior high,
but,
middle school.
We went from 6th grade to 7th grade and 8th grade, and there were only 11 grades in South Carolina at that time. And we had the usual activities that you have in high school, the annual and the little newspaper and the football games and all of the other things. We even had I remember there was a boys' boxing team then, which you'd never hear of today. And I had piano lessons, and my brother played the trumpet and was in the school band, and we were active in all of the activities that a small school had. I think we had about 60 people in our graduating class.
Wow.
And I remember the fun of senior plays and that sort of thing. It was a pretty good life.
Yeah, that sounds fun. So tell me a little bit about when the Depression hit. What was that like? How did that kind of change your childhood?
As a child, I must have been born in 21. I was 8 or 9, and we did not know. Children did not know much about it, and didn't understand about money and that sort of thing. We did see men who, I guess, rode the rails looking for work, and some of them, our house was not far from the Southern Railroad, and some of them would come onto our street and ask for food, and I know my mother always gave them something. I remember seeing men sitting on the back steps eating whatever she had from supper or lunch or that sort of thing. And we knew times were hard, but we did not feel deprived because there was always something to eat, and we had as much as other children had so far as toys and that sort of thing was concerned. But then, the Depression lasted a long time. It really lasted till World War II began, and probably beyond that. And by that time, I was 17 when I graduated from high school, and still, we knew about the Depression, but by that time, people were so taken up with the fact that there might be a war, and with the military and that sort of thing, till I don't know that girls my age didn't have the trips to Europe that they had in earlier times, and trips anywhere.
Right.
Well, none of us went anywhere except that you. And my mother, we did not have a car. She had a car when her children was small, to take them to school and that sort of thing. In inclement weather, we always walked in good weather. But she didn't like to drive, so she got rid of the car. And my brother, I think about it many times, he loved automobiles almost better than anything in the world. So he scrounged around and got some money to buy a little second-hand car when he was a teenager, and get some wheels. That was a great thing to do. But I don't remember the Depression, except that we just knew there were things we couldn't do and things we wouldn't ask, that I wouldn't ask for. And we knew how much something cost. And that, to me, is, I think that's in people my age think about, not young people, but other people, anybody, who doesn't worry about how much something you cost. You just put it on a credit card, and of course that was the day long before credit card.
Right.
But there were some people who couldn't pay their grocery bills, and neighbors were always kind and discreet in our little town. And sometimes I've heard of a particular man in our church who was very modest about and didn't want people to know he was giving things, but if he knew that someone was having a hard time, groceries would, or something like that would appear on that front porch. It is thought and it is said that he did that, and when everybody couldn't do it.
Right.
But I don't know. I've forgotten what we were
that's
talking
okay.
about.
I was just asking you about the Depression, but then I was going to ask you. You said you were 17 and you had graduated from high school, and everyone kind of rumors are going around about the war. How did life change once World War II was in effect for you?
For me, I think I was a senior when the war started. And I went to Winthrop College in Rock Hill, and I think everyone remembers where they were when they first heard about the war.
Where were you?
When the bombing of the Japanese on a Sunday afternoon, and I was at Winthrop and working at the canteen. The YWCA had a canteen, and I had volunteered for some of that, and I was at that canteen when I heard that news.
Oh, wow. How did you feel when you heard the news?
It's hard to remember. I suppose I was shocked. We knew that, we felt that some kind of military action was imminent, but I certainly didn't think that we would be attacked.
Right.
And of course it was devastating. And Pearl Harbor was on our minds a great deal. And then all of us were, as I said, I was a senior, and that was in December, and we knew so many young men who were involved and who had Clemson here had military
Mm-hmm.
cadets, and the Citadel had military cadets, and even the smaller schools like PC and I think Wofford, I'm not sure, had an ROTC program.
Right.
So they were to become second lieutenants that June, and many of them did. I suppose most of them did who had that, and they were called into service immediately. And so their life was planned for them.
Right.
And there was some, I don't believe I knew anyone early on who became a WAC, and I can't remember when the Women's Army Corps, which was WAC, and the Navy had a similar one, was formed. I don't know. I do have friends who were in the WAC.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Navy, and I can't remember the name of the Navy initials for the Navy.
Right.
Girls who served in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't. I graduated in 1942 and went to teach English in Orangeburg, South Carolina,
Okay.
and loved it, liked it. But then when the fever was high to serve your country and do the best you could and do something worthwhile. And of course I knew that teaching was worthwhile, and while I liked it, I found that a man in Orangeburg named Mr. Bates, who was very active in recruiting young people to serve, young women to serve in the Red Cross. And so I went to see Mr. Bates and I applied to the Red Cross. And they called me to Washington for an interview. And so right after I finished school teaching that year, in early June, I went to Washington for an interview. And later within a week or two, was hired because they really needed people to do that.
Right.
And I was not interested in going overseas. I was too young to begin with. And because I think you had to be 25 at the time to serve overseas. And so I was interested in the hospital recreation, although I had no training in recreation. But we were trained in Washington for a six weeks period. And I was trying to think today where we were. I know we were housed at the old Burlington Hotel,
really?
Then went on buses out to American University where we had classes.
Okay.
And they trained men and women and those who were going overseas and those who were planning to stay here. But my mother was a widow, and I would not have done that to her.
Right.
It would have been too difficult for her. So after our training, I was sent to Camp Butner, which was outside of Durham, North Carolina, between Durham and Raleigh. And they had the Army had a large brick hospital there, and we were attached to a little house with nurses, Army nurses, and were fed in the nurses' mess. Our meals were there. So it was very exciting and very rigorous. We were busy all day long because we served in this recreation hall, had a large recreation hall, brick hall, and then we were into the wards. And when we went in the wards, we had little, I was trying to think of the gauge of the camera. Later on, we all had 8mm. These must have been 16mm cameras. And I had to learn to thread that and then take it into the ward to show movies to the boys men who were too sick to come to the recreation hall. And you know, in the military, you're either sick or well. So that meant there were a good many ambulatory patients who would come in their maroon-colored bathrobes and gray pajamas down to the recreation hall where there were ping pong tables, and we were required to know a number of games. And I remember cribbage was one, and I couldn't tell you how to play cribbage now to save my life, but I played cribbage then. And we were supposed to did learn those games and played with them. And then we'd have skits and crafts that they'd take into the wards. And so many times the boys liked to do the crafts. I was surprised. We had leather work, and but I don't know whether it was chenille, but some kind of yarn that they made pillow covers out of and would send home. But then every now and then somebody famous would come along, and we would take them into the wards. And I remember, was it Joe Louis that was the Brown Bomber? He was a prize fighter and much revered by the men. And he was in the Army, and he was a Special Forces, I think. And he went from place to place to cheer the troops on. And I was the one that was assigned to take Joe Louis into the ward.
Oh, wow.
And back then, the Army had segregated wards. We had a colored ward, what we called a colored ward, which is an African-American ward, and the Caucasian soldiers. And so we went from one to the other and talked to them. And all of them were pleased to meet Joe Louis. So that was always fun. But I don't know what else to tell you about the recreation hall, except that we were busy all day long, and our time was divided between the halls and going into the wards.
Right. You said that most patients were either well or sick.
That's right.
What were the main sicknesses between the patients?
I don't know. Some of them just had common ills, and some of them were getting over wounds, because by 43, people were coming back from the service. And there was a psychiatric ward, people who had been damaged there. And we did not, I don't think any of us did work in the psychiatric ward. And when we had showed movies, which were in the recreation hall, which was the 32 millimeter movie, and we gathered a large crowd. The psychiatric patients were brought in, but they were put in a separate area.
Right.
And someone was with them. And the men really liked the movies.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Did you form a lot of close relationships with the men who had served?
Not too close. We saw them a lot, and they didn't all stay there very long.
Right.
If they were well enough to go back to duty, they went. I mean, they were required to go. But I'm trying to think if there's any other thing I could tell you about it.
What was the worst part about working for the American Red Cross, or what was like the hardest part, I guess? I know you said you were really busy, but...
Well, I personally did not see any heartbreaking war casualties. I don't know whether they just weren't sent to that particular hospital, or whether they were kept in wards where I did not see them. But unless someone was contagious or violently ill,
right.
we saw everybody that was there.
Were there a lot of other women that worked for you in the American Red Cross?
Well, in our unit was fairly small, and it was divided between the social workers, who were Red Cross women, and recreation workers. And in our unit, there was a head director of the whole group, and she was usually a social worker. And then we had about I'd say no more than 5, but probably 4 recreation workers. And we had a uniform, had a gray seersucker dress, with a shirtwaist dress with the Red Cross insignia on the collar. And then in the wintertime when we went out, we had a wool uniform with a jacket and a little cap. And I did go to some of the USOs at night with the, I guess with officers who were stationed there at the camp. And I remember going over to Raleigh, and one night, the hostesses there said, "Oh, there's the little Red Cross girl," so, as well as the wax and the men, the officers who were there.
Right.
And we were treated as we did not. So I don't know how to put that. We did not have dates with the enlisted men. We were considered, although we weren't officers, but we did our socializing with
Right.
the officers and the nurses who were also officers,
Right.
considered officers.
Mhm.
But I don't remember any heartbreaking, during the time I was there, heartbreaking instances in the Red Cross, and I don't remember any tragic things I had. I just know we were kept busy.
Right.
And unfortunately, I had flu at Christmas time and
no.
was in the hospital itself.
Wow.
And but I was not gravely ill, so I missed doing for them. But right before then, we sent packages to all of the gave all the troops Christmas packages, which were supposed to be furnished by the local Red Cross chapters, and they were. But that particular time, they sent packages wrapped in tissue paper with the twine that we all used, everybody, all civilians used, but we didn't know what was in them, and certain things we could not give, such as razors or anything like that. But we called on our friends, the Salvation Army, to see if they had any extra things, because we didn't have enough. And they sent beautiful boxes all alike for the men, and they had playing cards and cigarettes, and which was certainly an acceptable gift in 1943, and things that we could give with no trouble and knew exactly what they were. So
Right.
I've always remembered them for that, and in my personal giving of the
Right.
Salvation Army, as well as the Red Cross,
Yeah.
part of my giving.
So what led to your departure with the Red Cross?
What
led to your departure?
I was married.
Oh, okay.
I married a man from Chester who had just come back from service overseas, and he and I knew each other, and we had a good time with our romance, and that he was stationed. Yes, come in.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you so much. If you just put that there and being interviewed, thank you a lot.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. But you were married?
We were married in July of 1944. And we had our dating and our romantic courting away from Chester. And Chester's a little town, and everybody knew everybody, and we were both from Chester. So that was romance that they did not even know we were courting.
Yeah.
And that was fun.
That's a sweet story. Do you remember where you were on D-Day?
What's that?
Do you remember where you were on D-Day?
Yes, I was getting ready to be married,
Right.
and I was in Chester. D-Day was June the what?
6th,
9th.
9th.
When I was probably still where was I? I was probably still at Butner, because I resigned 2 weeks before we were married, and so that would have been the very last of June, and I was at Camp Butner. on D-Day. That was an exciting
Mm-hmm.
time for so many people, and a dreadful time for a lot of us who knew all of those and I knew all of those second lieutenants from Chester and from college days.
Right.
That's all.
What was the atmosphere like at the American Red Cross on D-Day? You said everyone was excited.
There was no ceremony
Right.
or anything like that, and I suppose there was tension. I do not remember any particular. I'm sure there might have been programs there, but I do not remember that.
So what was life like after the war once you were married?
Well, after the war, my husband was stationed he had returned to the United States, and he was stationed at Camp Davis in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Okay.
He was an officer in Coast Artillery, and after D-Day, he was sent about a week after D-Day to this was after the war we're talking about. He was sent from Camp Davis, where he had been stationed, to El Paso and at Fort Bliss, and we packed up our goods and some of our wedding china and things, and took his Buick car and drove 35 miles an hour from Chester to El Paso. I don't know how long it took us. We went by maybe we went by Pensacola and then by New Orleans and on across. And and I'd never been much anywhere. And we got to the border of Texas. I thought, oh, we're in Texas. He said, Carolina is a long way to Texas, a long way across Texas. And I wanted to take pictures, all the time, and the camera. And it was a long way because El Paso was right, as you know, on the western side of the state, and right on the border. And he was stationed there until about a year, I believe, and then was released, or maybe it was a little over a year from there to go back home, because by that time the Army had an overabundance of lieutenants and lieutenant colonels, and he was a lieutenant colonel, and his father had run the home business, which was a wholesale hardware company, and so he was dismissed early on request, and we came back to Chester in June of 1945. June of 45.
Okay. Wow. Well, do you have any advice for someone like me? You've lived such an awesome life and have served our country so well through the American Red Cross. What would you like someone in my generation to know?
Well, I don't have much advice. You all have so many options of what you want to do and how you want to serve your country, and do the best you can for your community. And I just think any kind of volunteer service that you feel is worthwhile is a good thing to do. But you also have careers to think about.
Right.
And it would be hard for me to advise any young person today, because your world is so different from mine and so complicated. But I think anybody through life, through just living and volunteering and helping wherever you can, whatever they do, in addition to your livelihood, is a satisfying thing. It has been for me.
Definitely. Well, and then in 1945, what was life like in Chester when you were married and back in South Carolina?
When we were first married, we were still using coupons for everything.
Okay.
And of course, during the war, just getting a pair of shoes, I think we were rationed either 1 or 2 pairs of shoes a year. And but as a young housewife in Chester, they were still rationing certain food items, bacon and chocolate and marshmallows of all things. If they were not rationing them, they were very scarce. They were not available.
Right.
And so I think the citizens during that war had a lot to endure in that they could not get things.
Right.
And, I remember in El Paso at one time certain canned goods, well, asparagus and other things were not rationed, and then they were put on ration, and then you couldn't get them. And pepper was one thing. And there was one time we bought white pepper because it was available and black pepper wasn't.
White pepper, I didn't even know there was such a
Well,
thing.
nobody did. But all of a sudden it was a rarity for anybody. For certain dishes, didn't want to put, I suppose, put black pepper in. But you learn to live with that. You learn to adjust. And people would stand in line when certain things became available at certain stores. I remember particularly going in El Paso to the liquor store. There were they'd have, the stores would get certain brands that people wanted.
Right.
And the army wives would line up for their husbands, because their husbands would work at the base working to get whatever it was that was available that day, and bring the little children and that sort of thing in a long line to get something.
Wow.
At the whiskey, there wasn't an ABC store. We had ABC stores in South Carolina, but not there. They just had regular.
Yeah. Oh wow.
But I don't remember any other. That didn't happen so far as food was concerned. But I do imagine that some things were available at the commissaries that would not be available to the stores.
Yeah. I forgot to ask you earlier, but did your brother serve?
Yes, he did. He was went to the Citadel, and that whole class was. He must have been a junior.
Okay.
Was dismissed and told to go into the service. They did go into the service, and he was a pre-med student.
Okay.
So he was sent to Anderson, Alabama, as a orderly in one of the hospitals there. And then he applied to the Medical College of South Carolina and was entered in that and went that as a cadet.
Okay.
As an Army private, I believe it wasn't a cadet. He'd been a cadet at Citadel, but he was an Army private at the Medical College of South Carolina.
Okay.
And I don't remember when he graduated, but the war was over by then. But he was called into the service because he was in the reserve when the Korean War came, and he was sent to, rather than to the Orient, he was sent to Germany, Frankfurt, Germany, with the Air Corps, and was a lieutenant.
Wow.
Or whatever. They were given, I believe, doctors. I don't know I take that back. I don't know whether he was captain or second lieutenant, I think. And served in Germany for maybe a year or two.
Okay.
And then came back to practice in Chester.
Okay. Well, I'm sure it was nice to have him home.
Oh, it was.
And I'm sure your mom was happy to have both of y'all home.
He was married right before he left, and they had a little son, and later she was able to go to Frankfurt and with the baby, and they lived there.
Oh, cool.
I think a year and a half or two. I'm not sure.
That's awesome.
But it was. We were fortunate he wasn't sent anywhere else, but I think they enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So that was great.
That's awesome. Well, thank you